Okay, so still just introducing myself. Right? Another module that I teach is called Introduction to Film Art. All right, and this is a module that focuses entirely on film. So in other words, in this module, no literary works are assigned. All the assigned works are films, right? And I guess most of us are quite accustomed to film as a medium of entertainment, right? So the blockbuster film has just opened. The summer film season is on. Iron Man, Star Trek, okay? But in this module, I look at the question of whether can the medium of film be considered a form of art, all right? And as a result, what we do in this module is that we look at the films of the world's great directors, right? Filmmakers like Stanley Kubrick, Alfred Hitchcock, Zhang Yimou, and Wong Kar-wai. They're also great Asian film directors as well. Okay, so some specific films that we study include films like Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, as well as Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love. Yeah. So many of you have probably done A-level lit, right? So you have done practical criticism. So here we are just sort of doing practical criticism using the medium of film. All right. So this is probably the module I enjoy teaching most. Okay. All right. Okay. So for today's talk, I've divided it into two very different parts. So there are two very different points of focus. All right. So the first part is just to offer you some intellectual stimulation. Okay. So I'll spend the first part just talking about, briefly about the production of literature in the 21st century, the age of globalization. And then I'll present you a small case study of a great writer in the 21st century. Right? Are there still great writers in the 21st century? Well, there's a small case study. All right? And in the second part of today's talk, I'll give you something more practical, which is to give you just more practical information about majoring in English literature here at FASS. Okay, so time is usually very short. I'll just proceed to the first part. So this first part is just for intellectual stimulation, right? So, so many of us who are passionate about literature, right? We always ponder the question of, will we ever see a great writer emerge in Singapore, all right? Does Singapore have any great writers, right? So, I mean, is that something you think about? One day, will you live to see a great writer emerge from Singapore? So the definition of a great writer is clearly a subjective one, right? So for some people, the more traditionally minded people, a great writer would be, say, who do you think the great writers would be? Shakespeare, John Milton, John Keats, all right? So, but for someone like myself who prefers more modern literature, the great writers for me would be James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, and people like Samuel Beckett. Right? So, but whoever our great writers may be, we often wonder if there'll be a day when we will see a writer of global significance emerge in Singapore, who to some extent fulfills some of the criteria of being a great writer. Right? But when we talk about Singapore context, we are always aware that our situation is very different from the situation of England and America, right? Because in the Singapore context, we are a modern nation, right? With a relatively short history, and most of Singapore's literary production will happen in the 21st century, right? It'll happen in this century, right? Unlike England and America that have had long histories of literature. Most of Singapore's literature will be written in this century. And we know that the 21st century is a very different century from earlier periods, all right? The 21st century is a century of globalization and of greater interconnectedness. And it is my view, so the point is that Singapore literature will be written largely in the 21st century, and my view is that the writing of literature in the 21st century faces increasing obstacles, all right? And one of the obstacles would be, say, increasing competition from other forms of media, like the internet. So these new forms of media, like the internet, have become so prevalent that literature, as we know it, is becoming increasingly marginalized, right? Another idea that I'm very fond of about writing in the 21st, in the globalized era, is that I think there will be a tendency for artistic standards to be lowered. Why? Because the age of globalization is also the age of capitalism and consumerism. So I think writers and artists will feel a lot of pressure to, in a sense, produce works of art that appeals to the masses, appeals to the consumerist taste of the masses, and I think artistic standards will tend to become lowered. Yeah. So, but all that said, so I'm giving you some of the difficulties of writing in the 21st century. But my point here is that there are still contemporary writers who produce literature of great significance, and I would consider them to be great writers. Right? And my case study for today, in terms of a contemporary writer whom I consider to be a great writer, and whom Singapore writers can learn from and emulate, would be the great writer J.M. Coetzee. All right. So now I'm sort of presenting you a small case study of whom I think to be a great writer in contemporary times, right? And so maybe as a start, since I'm introducing you to Coetzee, I teach you how to pronounce his name, right? So people always say Coetzee, all right? So his name is pronounced Coetzee, all right? It's an Afrikaner name, Coetzee, right? So, and Coetzee was himself born in 1940 in South Africa, right? And for most of his writing career, he's been known as a South African writer, right? So I guess I'm throwing up this example because even in the darkest parts of Africa, a great writer has emerged, right? So if South Africa in Cape Town can produce a great writer, why not a modern metropolis like Singapore, right? So most of his life was a South African writer. In 2002, he emigrated to Australia and became an Australian citizen. Okay, Coetzee, in terms of his greatness, just a quick introduction, is one of the rare writers who've won the Booker Prize twice, right? So, are you able to name just any one work for which Coetzee won the Booker Prize? Yeah, I think you may have studied it at A-levels in JC. Yeah, anyone? I mean, yeah, I guess I'm asking quite specific because you may not even know who this writer is. Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, thank you. Disgrace, all right, 1999. Yeah, that's right. Thanks for Disgrace. Okay. Would you know the second less well-known, more obscure novel for which you won the Booker Prize? You need a Coetzee specialist to know this, I guess. Yeah. Okay. So anyone? Okay. I mean, this is just to talk to you a little bit. Yeah. Okay. So I guess these are two. So Disgrace, 1999, and earlier 1983, Life and Times of Michael K. All right. So in 2003, Coetzee was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature. All right. And here you see him receiving his prize from the Swedish king. All right. And again, I'm just floating this up because in the far margins of the world, so-called, if you consider Cape Town, South Africa to be the margins, great writing can still be produced. And so what does that, I mean, is there something that Singapore writers can learn from Coetzee's writing? Okay. In their press release about Coetzee, the Nobel Prize Committee spoke about him as a writer who, in innumerable guises, portrays the surprising involvement of the outsider. Okay, so I guess this tells us that Coetzee's novels like to cast a spotlight on characters who are outsiders, characters who are marginalized characters, whom I guess critics would refer to as the other. Okay, so now maybe I'll just go on to say a bit more about what makes Coetzee's writing so great, so inspiring that I would even consider it to be great writing today. All right, I mean today in our age of American Idol and and Britain Got Talent. Is there still great writing being done, right? So, and I'm here saying that as I've been implying, Singaporean writers can, to some extent, not slavishly imitate Coetzee, but I guess learn to recognize the positive, awe-inspiring, deep qualities you find in Coetzee's work, and in their own way aspire to these high standards. Okay. So what are some of these positive, inspiring qualities? One would be the depth of Coetzee's engagement with South Africa's political reality, the depth of it. All right? And by South Africa's political reality, I mean South Africa's, both in its apartheid period, but also in its post-apartheid period. All right? And by depth, I mean that this is not just cursory political engagement. It is political engagement that is so deep that it develops ultimately into a form of ethical engagement. In other words, in Coetzee's political engagement, he doesn't just focus on the assertion of your political rights. He goes for the larger picture of what is morally right. So in a sense, ultimately, I think ethics is more important for Coetzee than politics. Politics is maybe just about asserting your rights, but if you want to push it to the largest picture, it is about ethics and what is ethical in the bigger picture. And in a sense, ethics and politics then are quite inextricably interwoven in Coetzee's writing. Okay, so there's just and so you don't get these superficial political engagement that you find in other writers, perhaps. Yeah. So when Coetzee won the Nobel Prize in 2003, I think nobody disputed it, right? And there are good reasons, right? Okay, maybe another positive, inspiring quality would be Coetzee's use of innovative literary strategy. So he was a major innovator in literary technique, Coetzee. Okay, so one example, for example, would be that as a writer who hails from South Africa, he's a writer who writes without a literary tradition. And I think, again, Singaporean writers can identify with that. Unlike say, if you are an English or an American writer, you write with centuries of literary tradition. From South Africa, what is your literary tradition? All right? And so how does Coetzee then overcome this problem of writing without a literary tradition? And he does so through his own literary innovations, all right? And he does so by, in a sense, this, what critics call bricolage, which means constructing his work by borrowing elements from other existing works. So, for example, you have his novel, probably one of his more well-known novels, Waiting for the Barbarians, 1980, right? So the title itself, Waiting for the Barbarians, the title itself borrows from at least two other prior existing works. All right. Again, can anybody name one or two of the existing works? Yeah. Did I hear something? Thank you very much. Yeah. So Waiting for Barbarians, in a sense, borrows from Samuel Beckett's 1950s play, Waiting for Godot. Right. So in a sense, the title itself borrows intertextually from Beckett's play, existentialist play, right? So and it again borrows from another work. Thanks for that. Thanks for the nice response. Yeah. It also borrows. Waiting for Barbarians borrows from. I guess this you may not know. It actually borrows from the title of a Greek poem, Waiting for the Barbarians, as well, by Constantine Cavafy. So imagine you're giving your poem, your novel, a title, which is in fact the novel that has already existed as a title for a Greek poem. Okay? And so when you read Coetzee's novel itself, Waiting for Barbarians, you'll find that the scenes are also, there are a lot of borrowings from other writers like Dostoevsky, Kafka, and Rousseau. And so in a sense, it's a work of bricolage. It's probably telling you that I'm a writer who is creating this work by assembling fragments from other works. All right? So there is, in a sense, this is perhaps what a writer without a literary tradition does. In a sense, this is what I have to do. Okay, so again, it's extremely innovative. I find Coetzee's writings to be extremely a deep pleasure to read. Okay, maybe the last point about another last awe-inspiring quality is Coetzee, as a writer, has a very deep, committed sense of ethics. All right, and so as a result, I think in his work where politics and ethics are concerned, ethics is always more important. So I mean, it does make you more ethical as a writer. I'll say a bit more how reading Coetzee made me more ethical, perhaps later on. All right, so I think great writers will have this kind of deeper ambition. Okay, so for example, Coetzee's sense of ethics is perhaps reflected to his sensitivity to the suffering of others. All right, so for example, he says here in this quotation, I, as a person, as a personality, am overwhelmed, all right? My thinking is thrown into confusion and helplessness by the fact of suffering in the world, and not only human suffering. So as a writer, as he contemplates the suffering in the world, he finds himself quite overwhelmed. And it's this sensitivity to suffering of others that makes his writing ethically oriented. All right? But here he's suffering of the world, not just the suffering of others. He also refers to not only human suffering. So what other types of suffering do you think he's referring to? He says, by the fact of suffering in the world, all the suffering in the world, in Iraq, in Syria, in China, earthquakes, Bangladesh, all the suffering in the world, and not only human suffering. What other types of suffering is he referring to? Suffering of? Not only human suffering. So who else suffers? Sorry? Nature, very good, very good. Thanks for that. Yeah, so nature. I guess maybe not plants, rocks, and stones, but animal suffering. And Coetzee, in a sense, is extremely sensitive to animal suffering. The tremendous animal suffering that happens on a daily basis in the factory farms that we live with today. Okay, and as well, he has had a few works. For example, he has a work called The Lives of Animals that deals with animal suffering. So battery hens, all right? Battery hens who spend most of their short lives cooped up in cages, all right? They lay eggs, and once they are unable to lay eggs anymore, what happens to them? Clearly they're just slaughtered. Okay, so is such an existence, is there a lot of suffering in such an existence, right? And so because of this, Coetzee is a committed vegetarian, and as I work with Coetzee for quite some time, I too tried very hard to become vegetarian, all right? But that's how, in a sense, it has a strong ethical impact on me, all right? And so you have here, I guess, turkeys just about to be slaughtered, and Coetzee is making you think about how when you enjoy your Burger King burger, where does the meat come from? All right, does it come at the expense of tremendous suffering? Okay, and so we will just look at a short passage from the lives. And Coetzee is a committed vegetarian. All right, he's deeply aware of the suffering. And this is in this quotation here. He talks about how humans. There's so much the suffering of animals, and humans seem quite indifferent to the suffering of animals. All right, each day. It means each day probably in the abattoirs all around us each day, a fresh Holocaust. Yet, as far as I can see, our moral being is untainted. All right, so humans are generally just indifferent. They don't care about the suffering. All right, we do not feel tainted. We can do anything, it seems, and come away clean. We can do anything and get away with it. There is no punishment. So man in the 21st century, with its technological superiority, has become quite proud and presumptuous. He can exploit animals in any way he wants. He doesn't feel that he has done anything wrong. All right? Meaning, like, say, battery hens, you coop them up in cages, all right? And they're very, very short and nasty lives. And you can do anything you want. You can inject animals with, and you don't feel as if you have tainted. So your conscience has become quite hardened. Okay, so I won't go on with this, but there's no, we can do anything anything and get away with it. There is no punishment. All right, so this is just to show you Coetzee's writing is quite ethically oriented, and he does make us think about quite important ethical issues. So with this short introduction, I think you will see that in Coetzee you do encounter quite an exceptional writer, right? So exceptional that I would, in a sense, classify him as being amounting to a great writer. Okay, maybe just a bit more about how interesting Coetzee is as a writer. So he, at the undergraduate level, he not only did English literature, but also mathematics. All right, and in his early work, he worked as a computer programmer in London for IBM in London. So again, in the Singapore context, we think about we don't associate computer programmers with writers who go on to win the Nobel Prize. Okay, but I guess these incongruous activities just for me reflects how Coetzee is to me it reflects for me his fierce independence. All right, as a writer, he's not going to be pigeonholed into neat categories, and it reflects his fierce independence, and it's combined with one final trait which I think Singapore writers can learn from: his complete discipline and devotion in relation to writing. So here you have just a quick quote on one of his fellow South African writers who talks about how Coetzee is a man of dedication and discipline. All right, and here I'm just saying that it goes just against the romantic myth of how poetry writing comes just from being inspired by the muse and being carried away in an ecstasy of poetry. All right, but here it is about being disciplined, sitting down every day at your desk and writing. All right, so you get this in this quote. Coetzee is a man of almost monkish self-discipline and dedication. He doesn't drink, he smoke or eat meat, he cycles vast distances and to keep fit, and spends at least an hour at his writing desk each morning, 7 days a week. So I think there are, even at this fairly simple level of discipline in your writing, which in a sense leads to the great writing that you get. All right. So in a sense, great writing is not just through poetic inspiration, but it is through these kind of dogged devotion and discipline to the craft of writing that ultimately bears the fruit of great writing. So even in this simple matter, I do think that there are a lot of positive qualities that we can learn from a writer like Coetzee. All right. In our hope that one day there will be a great writer emerging from Singapore. So this final point is simply about discipline, dedication, and perseverance to the art of writing. Yeah? Okay. Last points of Coetzee. I think you probably want to move on to the more practical parts, all right? So these are his lifetime of writing, 14 works, and very impressive range of issues that he looks at. South Africa's political situation, globalization, the welfare of animals, and in more recent times, he's becoming to look at more theological questions of the meaning of life, all right? The afterlife, death, and the existence of God. And as I was preparing for this, I came across his most recent novel, very provocatively titled The Childhood of Jesus, all right? Reviews tell me that the novel has nothing to do at all with Jesus, all right? But in a sense, it is quite a provocative title that at the same time also tells me that he's now in a phase where he's beginning, because he's going to die very soon, all right? He's probably in his 70s, all right? And he's now exploring the deeper existential and theological questions. I mean, to come up with a title called The Childhood of Jesus, okay? So in a sense, you still have a great writer in our midst, all right, who does want to look at issues in a very deep and profound way, right? And it's still possible even in our globalized era of American Idol and Britain Got Talent. Yeah. Okay. Let me now move on to my second half of the talk. Okay, which is the more. I hope that was. So maybe if you do come to NUS, you will be subject to lectures like that. All right. Okay. which hopefully are eye-opening and mentally stimulating. Yeah. Okay, so moving on to something more practical, all right? Okay, so I'm just going to outline for you some of the some things that pertain to majoring in English literature. Okay, so for those who are planning to or considering majoring in English Lit, the first module you will take will be EN 1101, Introduction to Literary Studies. All right. Okay, so basically this EN 111 is a basic module that covers basic module to the study of literature that covers the three basic genres of literature, namely poetry, narrative fiction, which mainly means the novel or the short story, all right, and drama, all right, which would mean plays. Okay, so currently some of the works that are being studied in EN 1101 would include works like Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, all right. We all know that the film version of this novel has just opened in the cinema, right? Okay. Yeah, and as well as Beckett's Waiting for Godot. Okay, I actually teach 1101 in the second semester, and these are the texts that I put on the syllabus. Okay, the lecturer who's teaching EN 111 next semester tells me that he is considering teaching Austen's Northanger Abbey and Ben Jonson's 17th century play Volpone. Okay. Okay. So many of you come to major in Lit having done A-level Lit, right? So you probably are wondering what is the difference between A-level Lit and EN 1101. What do you think the difference is? Yeah. Is there any difference? EN 1101 is the basic introductory literary module that all Lit majors start with. This is the first module that you do. Okay? Yeah. So what's the difference? I guess I sat down and thought about it. I didn't have any profound answers, all right? But the basic difference very simply is that clearly EN 101 will proceed at a faster pace, all right? At A-level, am I right or wrong to say that you do about 8 to 9 works in 2 years? About 8 to 9 works in 2 years? In 2 years? Okay, so maybe at EN 111 you're doing 5 to 6 works in a single semester of 3 months. So within 3 months you're doing 5 to 6 works. Okay, the average literature module has about say 6 works, all right? And as a literature major, you may be doing 3 literature modules in a single semester. All right, that means you'll be doing 18 works in a single semester of 3 months. Okay, so in a sense, things are a lot more intense. Okay, so clearly it happens at a faster pace. All right. Okay, and we might sort of talk about the difference between A-level Lit and literature at the university level. Okay, and at the university level, one obvious difference is that the literary analysis you're doing will be a lot deeper and more substantial. Okay, so it could, for example, be historically a lot more substantial in that you will situate the literary work more deeply within a given historical context. All right, or it could be theoretically more substantial in that you will be looking at the work in relation to the theory of a given theorist. Okay, so it'll be more substantial, right? So that's perhaps obvious. Okay, but not to worry, all right? We are hundreds and thousands of literature majors have passed through the program, and everybody survives. So you will, by osmosis, gradually grow into these higher paradigms. Okay. Okay. I think I've only like 12 minutes more. Okay. So EN 1101 is offered in 2 semesters. But if you are planning to major in EN 1 in Lit, you will do it in semester 1. All right. And in semester 2, you will go on to take, of your first year, you're going to take at least one 2000 level module, all right, and possibly one or a few 3000 level modules, okay? So, so at the moment, this is what you do in your second semester of your first year. Okay, so at the moment we have four 2000 level modules, okay? Backgrounds to Western Lit and Culture, Critical Reading, Introduction to Film Studies, and Reading the Horror Film. Okay, so the emphasis in the 2000 level modules will be to impart you with certain skills or interpretive tools with which to analyze text. So the emphasis is not on subject mastery. Okay, so one example of the 2000 level module would be EN 2203, Introduction to Film Studies, and it basically just introduces you to the various ways to approach the medium of film. All right, so two ways. One way is that film is a visual medium, so you need to know how to do visual analysis. All right. Another way is that film is a commercial medium, commercial product of the film industry. All right. So you'll also be studying film as a commercial medium and product. All right. So for example, I have an example here about how you do visual analysis. We could, for example, show you this scene from the famous film Citizen Kane. Okay. And how do we go about doing some visual analysis? So we'll first invite you to pay attention to the use of space in this scene. All right, and you notice that the use of space, there's a very clear foreground and a very clear background. All right, and the protagonist of the film is a young boy, Charles Kane, and he is in the far distant background of the film. And in a sense, the adults in the foreground appear looming and large, while the protagonist of the film, the child, appears as a small figure. So in a sense, the filmmaker is using size to symbolize to you their relative power. Okay, so the large figures symbolize adults with a lot of power, and the small boy figure represents how he's, in a sense, a helpless pawn in their decision. So in a sense, the visual analysis here, it will emphasize the use of visual scale to symbolize power. Okay? So then the introduction film will also teach you how to analyze film genres. Film genres like the Western and the such. And this will be maybe part of film as a commercial product, because studios and the film industry, when they make films, they do make films according to they use the genres in a sense as part of their production and marketing of films. Okay, all right. So that will be the 2000 level modules. Okay. I don't have time to go through one more 2000 level module. Okay, and so in your first year, you may have already started doing one or two 3000 level modules, all right? But from your second year onwards, students will start to take more 3000 level modules, all right? And I do want to leave some time for questions, so I'll rush a bit here. So the 3000 level ones will be, in a sense, a staple, okay? So these are the more advanced modules that help students to develop their subject knowledge in various fields and aspects of literature. So we do offer a wide spectrum of interesting modules at the 3000 level. So this will be the staple, all right? So you have the period modules in British literature, ranging from 16th century Renaissance literature, all the way to 20th century and beyond, the period modules, right? So we also have American literature. American literature 1 will be 19th century American literature. American literature 2 will be 20th century American literature, along with Asian American literature. Okay. So besides that, there will also be other aspects of literature. So, for example, literature and psychoanalysis. All right. or gender and literature, as well as modules on film and culture. So you have a module on history of film. History of film will look at the different periods of the history of film. Silent cinema, Russian montage cinema, French New Wave, all right? So it is the history of film. And then in more recent years, the history of film in terms of emerging Asian cinemas, all right? We also have a module. We just recruited a professor who specializes in Asian cinema. So he offers a module on the history of non-Western cinema. All right, but non-Western obviously includes Asian, South Asian, but also countries like Latin America, Brazil, Argentina. All right, okay, and also there'll be the critical theory modules. Okay, and so in a sense you have a wide range, and there'll also be modules beyond England and America. All right, so you have beyond England and America, European literatures of the post-colonial world, Singapore Lit, South Asian literatures. Okay, so in a sense, the modular system is flexible, so you can, in a sense, put together a program that suits your interest, and we can see how you may, in a sense, in your years here at FASS, you may be reading works encountering figures as diverse as Sigmund Freud, to John Keats, to Akira Kurosawa. Okay, so I guess literature majors do get exposed to a wide range of authors, figures, and issues, right? And you become very versatile thinkers. Okay, so I'll just say a bit about the fourth year. Fourth year is your honors year. About 70% of our lit majors go on to do honors, about 70%, and here you would do 4,000 level modules. These are always seminars, all right? So there are seminars where there's a lot of discussion and interaction, and you can also write an honors thesis, okay? An honors thesis in your final year. Like last year, I supervised an honors thesis on the fairy tale, all right? I mean, I think my student was working on the fairy tales, Little Red Riding Hood and Snow White, and she was working on stories that rewrote these fairy tales, okay? And I think and these are some of the 4,000 level modules, okay? And, okay, so you can also minor in English literature, all right, by offering 6 modules in English Lit, and you can also minor in film studies by offering 6 film studies related modules. Okay, and just as a summary, what do you gain by being an English Lit major? I mean, with animal suffering, all right, traveling to the abattoir and going to South Africa, I think in general literature does expose students to wide-ranging issues in life and in the world. Okay, maybe not very practical, all right, in terms of being immediately practical, but it does make you encounter life and the world in its vast diversity. Okay, and because of that, I think it develops in us an intelligence that is very critical and very versatile. Okay, and so you do become quite agile and versatile and critical in your thinking, right? And very lastly, in terms of specific skills, you become expert writers. All right, you become very strong writers. All right, and you are also, another great skill is that you're able to articulate your ideas very clearly and very effectively. Right, whether it is in speech or in writing. And in that case, then you can then write to the opinions page in the Straits Times and complain more effectively, because you are now able to articulate your ideas more clearly and more effectively, and not be these quiet, inarticulate people. Okay, so I think I am done. Maybe in terms of just job prospects, in terms of my own students, I currently have students in recent years who are now working, many of them go into teaching, all right? I have students who are, I have one student now who's working in the Ministry of Defense, one student working in the MDA, Media Development Authority, and what's the last one? Yeah, and one more student, I can't remember, yeah, but they are, you can get jobs, in the Straits Times, yeah, Janice, all right? So if you see the byline, Janice Tai, she was just a former student of ours, so in the Straits Times in SPH. So in terms of jobs, you can find jobs in teaching, journalism, definitely the civil service, in the ministries, in the stat boards, in public relations. And we also have students who set up their own companies, copywriting companies with writing. So it's so diverse that it's usually quite hard for us to tell you what literature majors go into, because it is almost, it's a wide range, including some who even go into banking, okay? Okay, so it's 3:30, I'm at the end. I'm happy to listen to questions, yeah. Any questions? No? Okay, so thank you for being a good audience, all right? I'm here, you can come down and ask me questions you need to. My colleague, the other speaker, is here now, yeah, on English language.